The first time I saw him, he was just another uniform in a crowded cafe. A cop with tired eyes, sipping black coffee like it was the only thing holding him together. But something about him made me look twice. Maybe it was the way he scanned the room, always aware, always assessing. Or maybe it was how his gaze lingered on me a second longer than necessary before flicking away. Like he knew he shouldn't be looking but couldn't help himself. I was used to that look. Men who were curious, but too afraid to say it out loud. Usually I ignored them. But this time I didn't. His name was David. I learned that when he came back the next day, ordering the same coffee, sitting at the same table. He wasn't in uniform this time, just a gray t-shirt and jeans, but his presence carried the same authority. "Do you always stare at people like that?" I asked, breaking the silence between us. His lips quirked into the barest hint of a smirk. "Only when I'm thinking." "And what exactly are you thinking?" He held my gaze for a moment before exhaling sharply. "That I don't know why I came back here." I did. Over the next few weeks, his visits became routine. He never stayed long, never said too much, but I could feel something shifting between us. There was an ease to our conversations, a familiarity that shouldn't have been there. He talked about the job, the long hours, the weight of responsibility. I talked about my work in photography, the way I captured moments others overlooked. "You see things differently," he said once, watching as I adjusted my camera settings by the window. "So do you," I countered. That was the thing about David. He noticed everything. The way I drummed my fingers against my cup when I was lost in thought. The way my voice softened when I talked about my childhood. The way I watched him, like I was waiting for him to say something he couldn't bring himself to admit. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, we found ourselves standing outside the cafe. The city hummed around us, but in that moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. "You ever wonder what would happen if you did something you weren't supposed to?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. I knew what he was asking. I took a step closer, testing the space between us. "Depends. Are you asking if it's worth the risk?" He didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. That was the night I realized the truth. David wasn't just another straight cop in a coffee shop, and I wasn't just another man in his peripheral vision. We were something else, something neither of us was ready to name. Yet, it started with a drive. David showed up outside my apartment one night, his car idling beneath the glow of the street lamp. No call, no warning, just headlights cutting through the dark, waiting. I hesitated before opening the door, but the moment I slid into the passenger seat, I knew there was no turning back. He didn't say where we were going. I didn't ask. We drove in silence, the city shrinking behind us until we were nothing but two shadows on an empty road. "You ever feel like you don't recognize yourself?" he asked, eyes fixed ahead, hands tight on the wheel. His voice was different, lower, heavier. I knew this wasn't about me. It was about him. "All the time," I said. The confession landed between us, thickening the air. He nodded, as if that was the answer he'd been expecting, as if he needed me to say it first. We pulled off onto a quiet overlook, the kind of place that swallowed secrets whole. The city lights flickered in the distance, but here, in the stillness, there was nothing to hide behind. "I don't know what this is," he admitted, running a hand over his face. "I don't even know why I'm here." But he did, and so did I. I reached over, fingers brushing against his. A small touch, tentative, fleeting, but enough to send a crack through whatever wall he'd built around himself. His breath hitched, his muscles tensed, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he turned toward me, his gaze searching. "You shouldn't," he whispered, though his body leaned closer, contradicting his own warning. "Then stop me." I gave him the chance, one last moment to step back. But he didn't take it. His lips met mine in a collision of heat and hesitation, of hunger and uncertainty. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't practiced. But it was real. His hands found my jaw, gripping like I was the only thing tethering him to the earth. I tasted coffee and doubt on his lips, felt the tremble in his breath as he fought against himself and lost. Then, just as suddenly, he pulled away. "Jesus," he muttered, dragging a hand through his hair. He exhaled sharply, like he could shake off what had just happened. This can't happen." I swallowed down the sting of those words. But it did. He didn't answer. He just stared out at the city like he could find a way to rewrite the past few minutes. But the truth was, there was no erasing it. Something between us had shifted. And no matter how much David tried to pretend otherwise, we had already crossed the line. David didn't stop coming around after that night. If anything, he became a constant, a shadow slipping into my life when no one was looking. At first, it was stolen moments. A hand brushing against mine as he handed me my coffee. A lingering look across the room, too quick for anyone else to notice, but heavy enough to leave an imprint. Then, late-night calls that stretched until dawn, his voice a quiet confession in the dark. "I don't know what's happening to me," he'd say, his words unraveling like a frayed thread. "I don't even know who I am anymore." I should have told him that love wasn't supposed to make you feel lost. But I didn't, because for the first time, he was choosing me. Our nights together became something sacred, hidden between locked doors and drawn curtains. In those hours, he wasn't a cop, and I wasn't his secret. We were just two people existing in a world no one else could touch. But daylight always ruined the illusion. In the mornings, he would leave without a word, slipping back into his life as if I didn't exist. I tried not to care, tried to convince myself that stolen love was better than none at all. But doubt crept in, slow and suffocating. Then came the first lie. One evening, I called him. It went straight to voicemail. A minute later, a text arrived. "Can't talk. With my fiancée." The words hit harder than they should have. He had never said her name before, never acknowledged the life he still had one foot in. I told myself it didn't matter, that he would choose me in the end. But the doubts only grew. The second lie came 2 days later, when he canceled our plans with a vague excuse. The third came when I saw him at a coffee shop. Not our coffee shop, but another one across town, sitting across from a woman with soft brown curls and a diamond on her finger. His fiancée. The realization should have shattered something inside me, but instead, it made everything crystal clear. I wasn't his choice. I was his escape. That night, when he showed up at my door, I let him in. I let him kiss me, let him whisper promises I already knew were empty. But this time, I was watching closely. Because now, I knew how the story ended. And I was finally ready to turn the page. The moment of reckoning came on a night thick with summer heat, the kind that made the air feel heavy, like a storm was waiting to break. David showed up at my door again, eyes weary, lips already forming an apology I had no patience for. I let him in anyway. Not because I forgave him, but because I needed to hear him say it, to admit what we both knew. "This thing between us," he started, running a hand through his hair. "It's gotten out of control." I folded my arms. "No, David. It's been exactly what you wanted it to be." His jaw tightened. "That's not fair." I let out a sharp laugh, hollow and bitter. "Fair. You're marrying her. And what am I? A phase. A mistake you'll bury the moment you say I do?" He flinched, but he didn't deny it. "I never meant to hurt you." His voice cracked, but I refused to let it soften me. I stepped closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Then why did you?" Silence stretched between us, thick with everything he wouldn't say. Because the truth was, I had never been part of his real life, just a hidden corner of it, a place he could disappear into when he didn't want to face himself. And I was done being a secret. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. "I loved you, David. Maybe that was my mistake." His face twisted with something that looked like pain. Maybe regret. Maybe shame. But none of it changed the truth. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice steady even as my heart fractured. "I won't." His hands clenched at his sides, like he wanted to reach for me, but knew he'd lost the right. "I don't know how to let you go." I shook my head. "You already did." And with that, I stepped aside, leaving the door open behind me. An exit. A final choice. He hesitated for half a breath. Then, without another word, he walked away. I didn't watch him go. I didn't need to. Because for the first time, I was no longer waiting for him to choose me. I had finally chosen myself.